The courtroom doors creaked open, and immediately the quiet murmur of the crowd fell into uneasy silence. Reporters shuffled their papers, family members leaned forward, and even the guards straightened as the judge entered. His black robe flowed with authority, and his face carried the usual mask of discipline and command. Everyone expected the same stern figure who handed down verdicts without hesitation. But today was different. As his eyes swept across the room, something unusual happened. His gaze stopped, locked, and lingered. At the defendant's table sat a man whose face pulled him years into the past. His breath caught in his chest. For a split second, the gavel in his hand felt heavier than stone. He wasn't just looking at an accused man, he was looking at the boy who had once raced him down dirt roads, shared stolen apples, and whispered secrets under the stars. The recognition struck him like a blow. Time seemed to warp, shrinking the distance between who they once were and what they had become. The judge's posture stiffened, but inside, a storm began to churn. The authority he carried into the room clashed violently with the memories rising in his heart. He tried to clear his throat, tried to look away, but his eyes betrayed him, returning again and again to the face he thought he'd never see in such a place. The crowd noticed the hesitation, though they could not understand its cause. The defendant, too, slowly raised his head. Their eyes met, and for the briefest moment, the courtroom vanished. No guards, no jury, no crime, only two boys from another time, staring across a gulf of years and choices. The silence in that moment was deafening, louder than any outburst. And though the judge finally forced himself to speak, calling the court to order, everyone present could feel it. Something unspoken had shifted in the room, and nothing about this trial would be ordinary. The defendant shifted in his chair, the faintest trace of a smile forming as recognition flickered in his eyes. He saw past the robe, past the gavel, past the years that had hardened his old friend's face. For a moment, he wasn't staring at a judge, he was staring at the boy who had once patched his scraped knees, the boy who defended him in schoolyard fights, the boy who swore they'd always have each other's back. That memory softened the tension in his shoulders, though the reality of his situation weighed heavier than chains. The courtroom, unaware of the history between the two men, buzzed with restless energy. A woman in the gallery whispered to her neighbor, wondering why the judge seemed unusually shaken. The lawyers exchanged glances, sensing something strange but unable to pinpoint its cause. It was as if the entire room held its breath, caught in a moment no one could explain. The judge's gavel tapped against the desk, a nervous attempt at composure. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and tried to mask the tremor in his voice. The title he carried demanded authority, yet authority slipped through his grasp like water the longer he stared at the man before him. He could feel his pulse in his fingertips, his chest tightening with every stolen glance. The defendant didn't look away. His gaze carried both gratitude and sorrow, like a man who wanted to thank fate for placing him before his old friend yet curse it for the cruel stage it had chosen. He didn't speak, but his eyes said everything. You remember me. And I remember you. The unspoken bond spread through the room like an invisible current, pulling everyone into silence. The tension was no longer just about guilt or innocence, it was about two lives, two histories, colliding in a place where memory had no legal standing, but power all the same. The prosecution rose with confidence, shuffling through thick stacks of paper as if victory were already in their hands. Their voice rang out sharp and steady, detailing every piece of evidence with precision. Photographs were displayed, testimonies read, timelines laid out with cold, clinical clarity. To the jury, it painted a picture of a man guilty beyond doubt, a man whose hands were stained not with childhood memories but with crime. Yet, as the judge listened, his mind betrayed him. Each statement about ruthlessness clashed with images of a boy who once shared his lunch on days when he had none, who stood in the rain with him when no one else did. When the prosecutor described him as heartless, the judge remembered the boy who cried when they buried a stray dog they'd tried to save. Every accusation felt like a knife, cutting away at memories he thought were unshakable truths. The jurors scribbled notes, their faces grim and convinced. The courtroom hummed with certainty that the case was airtight. But behind the bench, the judge's heart faltered. He was supposed to remain a wall, unmoved, impartial, the very embodiment of justice. Instead, doubt gnawed at him, small and insistent, like cracks forming in glass that once seemed unbreakable. He clenched his gavel, his knuckles white, forcing his expression into one of control. But beneath the mask, conflict brewed. Was he staring at a criminal who deserved punishment, or a brother in spirit who had lost his way? The law demanded one answer, his heart whispered another. And for the first time in years, the judge feared that justice might not be as clear as he had always believed. When the defense's turn came, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Instead of his attorney standing to argue, the defendant slowly rose to his feet, his chains clinking faintly in the silence. All eyes turned toward him. His voice was steady at first, but it carried the weight of years spent stumbling down roads he never meant to take. He spoke not like a man trying to escape punishment, but like someone desperate to finally be understood. He admitted his failures, the reckless choices, the wrong people, the nights where desperation clouded his judgment. He didn't paint himself as a saint, nor did he beg for pity. Instead, he spoke of regret, the kind that carved itself into his soul and lingered long after the damage was done. He described moments when he had stood at the edge of doing right and wrong, only to fall into the easier darkness. And as he spoke, the courtroom no longer saw just a defendant, they saw a man broken by the weight of his own mistakes. But then his words turned. His eyes lifted, not to the jury, not to the crowd, but to the bench. He spoke of the boy he once knew, the boy who had believed in him when no one else did. His voice trembled as he said he wished he had lived a life worthy of that faith. He didn't say the judge's name, but everyone in the room felt the connection. The silence was so heavy it seemed to bend the air. The judge sat frozen, every word striking deeper than any piece of evidence. His gavel felt useless in his hand, his robe like a costume hiding a man who could not stop remembering. He wanted to look away, but the pull of that gaze, the plea of an old friend asking not just for justice but for recognition, held him captive. And though no one spoke it aloud, everyone in the room knew this was no longer just a trial about guilt or innocence. This was a reckoning between two lives, one that the law could not fully measure. Hours crawled by as the jury retreated behind closed doors, leaving the courtroom in a tense, echoing silence. The judge remained at his bench long after the gavel had been set down, his posture straight but his spirit restless. He had presided over countless cases in his career, each one weighed carefully, each verdict delivered without hesitation. But never had his heart battled his duty so fiercely. Alone in that chamber of justice, his thoughts drifted to the dusty streets of their childhood. He saw two boys running barefoot in the sun, laughing until their sides ached. He remembered late nights lying on rooftops, whispering promises to each other beneath the stars, that no matter where life took them, they would never stand alone. Those memories came rushing back with painful clarity, colliding violently with the man now on trial for crimes that could not be ignored. He buried his face briefly in his hands, the weight of the robe pressing down heavier than ever before. Was he capable of true impartiality? Could he strip away the boy he remembered from the man the world now judged? Justice demanded blindness, but his heart could not unsee what his memory revealed. Every second that ticked by felt like a test he wasn't sure he could pass. From the defendant's table, his old friend sat quietly, not speaking, not moving, but watching him with the same calm patience he had shown years ago when they both got into trouble as boys. There was no plea in his eyes, no manipulation, only a silent acknowledgement of the impossible choice before the man he once called brother. The judge's chest tightened, his breath uneven. He knew the law, knew the principles he was sworn to uphold, yet he also knew that after this day, no verdict, guilty or not, would ever bring him peace. The courtroom was no longer just a place of justice. It had become a battlefield inside his soul. When the jury finally returned, the air inside the courtroom felt suffocating. Every shuffle of a foot, every cough from the gallery, every creak of the benches seemed amplified by the tension. The foreman stood, a folded paper in hand, and cleared his throat. All eyes turned toward him, but the judge's gaze remained locked on the man seated at the defendant's table. The words came slowly, deliberately, echoing off the walls with a finality that no one could escape. The verdict struck the air like a hammer, and in that moment, time seemed to stop. Some gasped, some nodded, others sat in stunned silence. But the only sound the judge truly heard was the thunder of his own heartbeat. The defendant lifted his head, and their eyes met one last time. No anger burned there, no bitterness. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, a wordless message carried in that single look. I know you tried. I know this isn't easy. And I don't blame you. It was the same look he used to give when they were boys and one of them stumbled, an expression that said forgiveness without needing to be spoken. The judge swallowed hard, his throat dry as sand. His hand trembled when it reached for the gavel. He spoke the formal words required of him, but his voice carried cracks he couldn't hide. He felt the weight of not just the law but of every memory they had shared pressing down on him. In the eyes of the world, justice had been served. But inside, he knew something far greater had been lost. As the guards moved forward to escort the defendant away, he didn't struggle. He glanced back only once, offering the faintest nod to the man who had once been his closest friend. That simple gesture pierced deeper than any cry or protest ever could. The gavel fell with a hollow echo, marking the end of the trial, but the beginning of a torment that the judge knew would never fade. For the rest of his life, he would carry the image of that final look, the look that reminded him that sometimes justice demands a price that even the strongest hearts cannot truly pay.